first electric bill after Alex went solar was not large. It was worse. It existed. The presentation had made it sound like almost nothing would be left. A small connection charge, the kind nobody escapes. Instead, the bill came at $63, and the next morning, the payment on his $60,000 solar loan left his checking account. 2 bills, where he had been promised one. 18 months later, a notice told him the payment was going up by more than $100 a month. He had never missed one. He called the salesman. The number rang, and nobody answered. It never would again. Alex was not careless. He read things. He asked questions. He compared a monthly payment to his electric bill, the way almost everyone does. And that comparison is exactly where this went wrong. The panels were attached to his roof. The debt was attached to his future. To understand how a man ends up making 2 monthly energy payments instead of the one he expected, you have to go back to the summer before when he was only trying to solve one problem. It started with the air conditioning. Alex lived in a 1990s house with a west-facing living room and an air conditioner that ran from May until October. He cleaned his own gutters. He had opinions about mulch. None of that helped in August. The bills had been climbing for 3 summers, not dramatically, just steadily, in a way that made him do arithmetic in the grocery store. He kept the thermostat 2 degrees higher than he wanted and told himself it was fine. But there was a low background worry that the number kept going up and he had no way to make it stop. That is the part people forget when somebody signs a bad solar contract. Before there was a contract, there was a real problem. Electricity is not optional. It arrives, you use it, and later somebody tells you what it cost. So when Alex started reading about rooftop solar, he was not chasing a gimmick. He was looking for a ceiling. He liked the environmental side too, though that was not the reason. The reason was the August bill. Big southern slope. Almost no shade. From the driveway, it looked like an obvious yes. He had not called anybody yet when somebody called on him. The salesman came to the door on a Tuesday evening in late winter. Polite. Clean shirt with a small company logo. He had a tablet and he did not ask to come inside right away, which somehow made Alex more willing to let him. He was good at his job, and being good at that job is not the same as being a criminal. He knew the local utilities rate history. He asked to see one of Alex's electric bills before he said a single word about panels, which felt like the opposite of a sales pitch. Then he turned the tablet around. There was a satellite photograph of Alex's own house with a rectangle of blue drawn onto the roof. There was a chart with 2 lines. One was what he would pay the utility over 25 years if rates kept climbing. The other was what he would pay with solar. The gap was shaded in, and the shaded part had a number on it larger than his car. Every piece of the offer sounded reasonable on its own. Nothing due today. A monthly solar payment, lower than what he was already paying for power. A federal tax credit worth 30%. A 25-year warranty. A production guarantee. A system, the proposal said, would offset nearly all of his annual electricity use, leaving only small, unavoidable utility charges, and a home worth more with it than without it. There was pressure, but it was gentle. Crew availability in this zip code this month. Panel pricing moving. Nothing threatening. Just the sense that the door was open now, and might not be later. Then the number that did the actual work. The salesman put the tablet flat on the kitchen table and pointed at the monthly payment. $233. Alex's electric bill the previous August had been over $300. That was the whole comparison. The entire decision, 2 numbers sitting beside each other on a screen. One number had been rising every year. The other looked predictable and lower. To Alex, it felt like the obvious choice. What he did not yet understand was that $233 was only the starting payment. Nobody at that table said the words $60,000 out loud. The paperwork happened on the same tablet in the same sitting in about 40 minutes. This is the part that is easiest to describe unfairly. Alex did not sign blind. He was shown documents. He scrolled. He tapped signature boxes that appeared one after another, each highlighted, each explained in a sentence. Installation agreement, system design, financing application. Approval came back in under 10 minutes, but a contract on a tablet is not a contract on a table. On a table, you can see a whole page. You can put your thumb on one number and your finger on another and compare them. On a tablet, you see whatever fits in the window. Somebody else controls the scrolling, and the highlighted box is always at the bottom. Federal regulators have described this exact dynamic. Sales, installation, and financing blend into one interaction. 3 separate companies can feel to the homeowner at his own kitchen table, like one company, one product, one signature. So Alex focused on the 3 things he had been given to focus on: the payment, the savings estimate, the installation date. The other things were there too: the cash price, the amount financed, the total of payments over the life of the loan, a financing charge, a condition about a prepayment, a page of disclaimers explaining that production figures were estimates and that his payment did not depend on how much electricity the system actually made. None of that was hidden in the sense of being invisible. It was present and unemphasized, which in a 40-minute kitchen table transaction is close to the same thing. He signed. The tablet went back in the bag. Here is what was actually in that agreement. The system had a cash price of $45,000. That is what the installer was paid to design it, deliver it, and put it on the roof. The loan was for $60,000. The difference, $15,000, was a financing charge. In Alex's agreement, it worked this way. The installer received the $45,000 cash price. The lender kept the $15,000, and Alex started out owing $60,000. $15,000 is 1/3 of $45,000. He borrowed 1/3 more than his system cost. Not every solar loan is built like this, and the ones that are do not all use the same numbers. But Alex's structure is not rare. Federal regulators have found these charges commonly run between 10 and 30% of the cash price, sometimes far more, and that salespeople frequently do not explain the gap between the cash price and the loan principal. Now look at what that does to the interest rate. Alex's rate was just under 4.5%, fixed for 25 years, genuinely low, lower than most car loans. It was the number he repeated to his brother-in-law at a barbecue. But a rate is a percentage of something. $15,000 of cost had already been moved inside the amount he was borrowing before the percentage was ever applied. The rate looked small because part of the price had been buried in the principal. If Alex paid on schedule and never prepaid $1, his payments would total just over $101,000 for a system with a cash price of $45,000. He did not know that number the night he signed. Installation took 2 days in early spring. 2 trucks, 22 panels on the south slope. The utility swapped the meter. A neighbor walked over and asked who did the work, and Alex handed him the salesman's card, which felt good. Then the app went live on his phone. There's a real pleasure in that first week that should not be mocked. He watched a little green curve build across his screen every morning. He showed it to his daughter. For about 30 days, he had the feeling he had actually paid for, which was the feeling of having solved it. The first post-solar electric bill arrived in the middle of the second month. $63.11. He read it twice. The system was working. The bill proved it in a way. His usage charge was a fraction of what it had been. That part of the promise was real. But there was a monthly service charge from the utility that had nothing to do with how much power he used. And there were all the hours his house drew power when the sun was not on the roof. Evenings, nights, the short gray days in December. Net metering credits in his state covered part of that and not all of it. The bill did not disappear. It shrank and it stayed. The next morning, his loan payment went out automatically. $233. He had no way of knowing yet whether anyone had broken a law. What he knew was narrower. The system worked. The financial result was weaker than the presentation had led him to expect. That is a much harder thing to explain to your spouse. The honest question, the one he sat with for weeks, was whether the system was broken, badly designed, or had simply never been capable of what the chart on the tablet said. Here is what actually determines whether rooftop solar saves you money, and none of it is a conspiracy. Production depends on how much sun physically lands on the panels. Roof pitch, which direction the slope faces, shade from a tree that will be taller in 6 years than it is today, cloud cover, and the plain fact that December has fewer daylight hours than June. Savings depend on something else entirely. What your utility charges, whether there is a fixed monthly fee you pay no matter what, and what you get credited when your panels make more power than your house is using. Those rules are set by state regulators and utilities. They vary enormously, and they change. Add an electric vehicle or a heat pump, and the calculation moves again. A production estimate is a model. A savings projection is a model built on that model, with guesses about future electricity rates layered on top. The chart on the tablet was not a lie, it was a forecast presented with the confidence of a receipt. Alex's system produced real electricity, somewhat less than the proposal projected, in a range the installer called normal variation, back when the installer could still be reached. The savings were worth real money, just not as much as the payment he had taken on to get them, which brought him to the thing that was supposed to fix everything. Alex's system was placed in service in early 2025. At that time, the federal residential clean energy credit was worth 30% of qualified costs, and the salesman had used that number constantly. 30% back. That is how it was said. 30% back. Alex heard that and pictured a check. That is not what a non-refundable tax credit is. It reduces the federal income tax you owe. If you owe less than the credit is worth, you cannot use all of it that year, and nobody hands you the difference in cash. The unused part carries forward, which is useful, but a carry forward does not help you write a check today. There were two more things he did not understand. The first was timing. He installed in spring of 2025, and the credit lived on his 2025 tax return, which he did not file until the following year. The benefit was more than a year away from the day he signed. The second was what the credit is calculated on. It applies to qualified expenditures for the property and its installation. The Internal Revenue Service is direct about this. Do not include interest paid, including loan origination fees. The credit is not 30% of whatever your loan balance happens to be. Alex had assumed 30% of $60,000. His tax preparer worked from numbers much closer to the $45,000 cash price. Because here is what nobody had said in his kitchen. The loan expected $18,000. Alex's return showed that about $6,200 of the credit could be used that year. The rest carried forward. That was valuable. But it was not $18,000 in cash that he could send to the lender before the payment changed. If you are watching this in 2026 and considering solar, the federal picture has changed, so hear this plainly. Under current law, the residential clean energy credit is not available for a new system whose original installation is completed after December 31st, 2025. State credits, utility rebates, and local programs may still exist where you live, and some of them are substantial, but they are not the federal credit. If anyone tells you that 30% still applies to a new installation this year, do not simply take their word for it. Verify it yourself at the source before it becomes part of your payment. Alex made every payment on time by automatic draft for 18 months. In the 19th month, the notice came. His payment was increasing from $233 to about $344. He assumed it was an error. He had never been late. There was no penalty language in the letter, and no mention of default, because there was no default. He was current. Here is what actually happened. His starting payment had never been the payment on a $60,000 loan. It was the payment on the loan the lender expected to exist after Alex made a large prepayment out of his tax credit. The contract gave him 18 months to pay down about 30% of the principal, roughly $18,000. If he did, the low payment continued. If he did not, the loan reamortized, which means the lender recalculated the payment so whatever was still owed would be paid off over the years remaining. This structure is common. Federal regulators found that solar-specific loans routinely re-amortize to a higher payment in the 19th month when no substantial prepayment has been made, and that the expected prepayment is frequently set at 30% of principal, which is the size the federal credit used to be. Many borrowers never saw it coming. Then Alex opened his statement and found the number that actually stopped him. In 18 months, he had paid the lender $4,197. The amount that had come off his balance was about $162. Everything else was interest. The loan he had faithfully paid for a year and a half was, for practical purposes, as large as the day he signed it. He started calling the installer that same week. The first call reached a real person who took a ticket number. The second went to voicemail. The third produced an email 4 days later, automated, promising a response within 5 business days. There was no response. The salesman's cell rang and rang. Later, it stopped ringing at all. He was not asking for anything unreasonable. He wanted his production data. He wanted somebody to look at whether 22 panels were performing the way the proposal said, and if not, whether the production guarantee meant anything. Those are warranty questions. What he got was the particular silence of a company that has stopped servicing his area or changed hands or decided he is no longer worth a truck roll. No letter announced it. It quietly became true. The loan payments kept leaving his account on the same day every month at the new amount. That is the piece most people get wrong, and it is worth understanding before you sign. There were 3 parties in Alex's kitchen that night, even though it looked like one. The salesperson made the presentation and closed the sale. The installer designed the system, put it on the roof, and holds the workmanship warranty. The lender wrote the loan and collects the money. Often these are 3 separate companies with separate contracts and obligations. When Alex called the lender to say the system was underperforming and the installer had vanished, the representative was not rude. She was clear. The lender services the loan. It does not service panels. Whether a homeowner in that position has legal rights against the lender is not a simple yes or no. It depends on the contracts, on the relationship between seller and lender, on state and federal law, and on exactly what he was told. State regulators are looking at exactly this. In March of 2026, the New York Attorney General sued a home solar company and 2 lending partners over allegedly deceptive sales to seniors and low-income homeowners. In July, the Michigan Attorney General sued a solar company and the institutions that financed its customers, alleging harm to roughly 1,700 households. Both are allegations. Neither has been proven. But the pattern regulators describe is the pattern Alex was living in. A performance dispute and a payment schedule are 2 different contracts, and they do not automatically move together. 2 years in, he and his wife started talking about moving closer to her mother. He called the lender for a payoff quote and got a number just over $59,000. Then his agent asked the question agents now ask early, is the solar loan assumable, and by whom? Sometimes it is. A lender may allow a qualified buyer to take over the loan, which leaves the panels with the house and the debt with the new owner, subject to that buyer's credit and the lender's approval. When that is not permitted or no buyer wants it, the seller generally pays off the balance out of the proceeds at closing. Panels are almost never removed and carried to the next house, because moving them risks damaging both the panels and the roof. Alex's lender had also filed a financing statement covering the panels. It was not a mortgage on the house, but it was still something the title company and buyer's lender needed resolved before closing. The exact effect depends on the agreement, the filing, and local title practices. None of that makes a house unsellable. It makes a house complicated, and complicated is expensive. Owned solar may add value to a suitable home, But no national average could guarantee what Alex's particular system was worth to a particular buyer, especially while almost the entire loan balance remained. So why does this work? Because the offer was never presented as a purchase. Nobody asked Alex to buy a $60,000 roof. They asked him to replace one monthly bill with a smaller monthly bill. That is a different question, and almost everybody says yes to it. Everything else supported that frame. The authority of a professional holding data about his own house, the mild urgency of crew availability, financing and installation collapsed into one signature, and a document long enough that reading all of it in front of a waiting stranger would have felt rude. None of that requires a villain. It only requires a small number to be more visible than a large one. So, here's how you check a solar offer before you sign. 5 things to make somebody put in writing. First, price and financing. Ask for the cash price of the system as a separate number from anything involving a loan. Then ask for the loan principal. Subtract one from the other. Whatever is left is what the financing costs you before a single dollar of interest. Then look at the annual percentage rate and the total of payments, which is the actual money that will leave your life. And ask in these words, can my payment change at any point? And if so, when and to what amount? Second, production and utility rules. Get the full production estimate with its assumptions. Compare the system size against 12 months of your own real usage. Find out how your utility compensates excess generation, because that rule, not the panels, determines much of your savings. Third, tax claims. Verify current incentives yourself at the source, and never treat a projected tax benefit as cash you will have. If the payment structure assumes a large prepayment, ask what happens if you never make it and get the higher number in writing. Fourth, warranties and the company. Find out who backs each warranty. The panel manufacturer, the inverter manufacturer, and the installer are 3 different promises, and only one is the person in your kitchen. Ask what happens to your service if that company closes. Fifth, the future sale. Ask whether the loan can be assumed by a buyer, what the lender requires, and what a payoff would look like. Then take the agreement out of the salesperson's presence and read it somewhere quiet, with your own tax professional or attorney if the numbers are large. A real offer survives a day. If you have already signed and you are watching this, recognizing your own kitchen table, there are calm, specific things to do. Collect everything: the purchase agreement, the loan documents, the sales proposal, the production estimate, screenshots of text messages. Request the cash price documentation in writing. Communicate with the installer and the lender in writing from here on, and keep copies, because a documented email trail is much easier to use later than a phone call. No one can independently verify. Pull your monitoring records and compare actual production against whatever the contract guarantees. If it guarantees anything, look up your cancellation rights. Federal rules for sales made at your home provide a 3 business day cancellation window on qualifying transactions, and many states add their own, some longer. Deadlines and conditions vary, so check your state rather than assuming. Then use the complaint channels, because they are how patterns get found. Deceptive sales practices go to the Federal Trade Commission. Financing problems go to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Your state attorney general handles both. Filing a complaint does not cancel a loan. It creates a record, and records are what turn scattered homeowners into the state investigations happening right now. If the money at stake is large, talk to a real attorney in your state, not the internet, not a video. Alex still has the panels. They still work. On a clear day in June, the app still draws its little green curve, and the house runs on sunlight through most of the afternoon. And on those days, he can almost remember why it seemed like such a good idea. He also still has an electric bill, smaller than it was, still there every month with its service charge and its winter evenings. He has a solar loan payment of about $344 that will still be there when his daughter finishes college. He has a phone number that does not ring, and about 23 years left on an agreement he made in 40 minutes. He is not ruined. He is not losing the house. He is carrying something heavier, than he understood he was agreeing to quietly and rearranging the rest of his life around it. The mistake was not going solar. Solar can be a good decision on the right roof with an honestly sized system at a real price. With financing you understand, it can save a household serious money over 20 years. The mistake was evaluating a 25-year, $60,000 obligation using one number and letting somebody else choose which number that would be. If this helped you see the real price behind a smaller monthly payment, subscribe to Money Traps Explained. Alex did not put panels on his roof because he wanted another debt. He wanted relief from a bill that kept climbing. The salesman showed him sunshine, savings, and one manageable monthly number, and every part of that was pleasant to look at. What he signed was heavier. A cash price he never compared. A fee folded into the amount he borrowed. A payment built on a tax benefit that never arrived as the cash the loan assumed, and an obligation that outlived the company, the salesman, and every unanswered call. The panels were attached to Alex's roof. The debt was attached to his future,